For thousands of years, the greatest cities on Earth were not built by the strongest or smartest people. They were built by the normal human beings who lives near the river, and that simple ability created kings, armies, and some of the most powerful civilizations humanity has ever seen. If you look at a map of the ancient world, you will realize something strange immediately. The first great civilizations did not randomly appear everywhere, but they appeared beside rivers. Ancient Egypt grew around the Nile River. The Mesopotamia rose too grew between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Also, the ancient civilizations of the Indus Valley developed beside the Indus River. And still, the ancient China was also formed around the Yellow River. Did you think this is coincidence? Well, let's find out. You see, a river was more than just a source of drinking water. To ancient people, a river was just like a survival itself. It gave them fertile land, food, transportation, and the ability to support millions of people. But the greatest gift a river gave to humanity was something much more powerful than crops. It gave the humanity a reason to create a strong, centralized government. To understand why, we need to imagine ourselves as a farmer living 6,000 years ago. You will wake up before the sunrise and walk to your farmland. Your entire family's survival depends on the crops growing in that soil. But the problem is, if the land is dry and rain does not come when you need it, your crops will instantly die immediately. By all means, you must source a water from the river. The river carries enormous amounts of water across the land every single year. If you can somehow move that water from the river into your fields, your crops will grow and your family will have food. But here is the problem. You cannot control a river alone. A single person cannot dig hundreds of kilometers of canals. A family cannot build huge walls to stop floods. Even all the village gathered cannot maintain an entire system that brings water from river to thousands of farmlands. The moment people began depending on river irrigation, they need to have an organization. And in that organization, someone had to decide where the canals would be built. Someone had to organize thousands of workers to make sure every farmer received water at the right time, and that someone had to settle arguments when two villages fought over who deserved more water, and slowly, that person gained power. At first, the person may have been a normal, respected leader chosen by his community, but over generations, those leaders became administrators, rulers, and eventually kings. This was the birth of the centralized government. Ancient Egypt is perhaps one of the best examples of this transformation. Every year, the River Nile flooded the surrounding land and left behind a layer of rich soil that was perfect for farming. The flooding was both a blessing and a danger. Managing the Nile required a massive amount of planning. Workers had to build canals, maintain barriers, store food for difficult years, and organize agricultural activities across enormous distances. A small village could never control all of this. Only a powerful government could do that. This is why Egypt eventually became one of the most centralized societies in history. The pharaoh was not only a king, he is the engine that organized labor and maintained order for millions of people. Same story in Mesopotamia. The land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, but those rivers were unpredictable. They could flood violently and destroy everything that stood in their path. The people living there had to build complex irrigation systems to survive. Entire cities worked together to dig canals, repair them, and protect their farmlands. This situation required leaders, workers, and systems of punishment for anyone who disrupted the network. Over time, these cities developed some of the earliest governments, legal systems, and bureaucracies in human history. The river did not simply feed civilization, it also demanded them. Here is an interesting question. If rivers created powerful governments, what happened to people who did not live beside rivers? The answer will reveal why many societies without major rivers developed very differently. Imagine you live in a region where there is no giant river. Perhaps you are a hunter following animals across grasslands. Perhaps you are a herder moving with your sheep and cattle. Perhaps you live in a place where farming depends only on seasonal rainfall. Your survival does not depend on maintaining thousands of kilometers of canals. You do not need a huge workforce working together every year to control water. If a local leader becomes cruel or demands too much from you, you can simply take your family, your animals, and travel somewhere else. This makes it extremely difficult for the government to be powerful. Many nomadic societies had leaders, traditions, and systems of law, but those leaders usually had less direct control over everyday life because their people were spread over enormous areas. A king can easily control people who depend on a single river for survival, but it is much harder to control people who can disappear into the different part of the world. This is why many of the earliest and most powerful states formed in fertile river valleys often remained decentralized and powerful for long periods of time. Since rivers created a centralized governments, it created wealth too. When farmers produced more food than they needed to survive, they sold them. Not everyone needed to become a farmer anymore. Some people became craftsmen, some became merchants, some became soldiers, while others became builders and engineers. Cities began to grow and grow, but larger cities create new problems. How do they prevent crime? How do they decide who owns what? How do they protect stored food from thieves? The answer is simple. Government officials appeared to collect taxes every month or year, depending on the law of the land. The organized soldiers protected cities, and judges decide who owned this. The larger a civilization became, the more complex its government needed to become. Their governments become larger and more powerful than anything humanity had ever seen before. The rivers gave the government full power and control. A farmer living beside the River Nile could not simply abandon his home and his farmland. They were so connected to the river to irrigate their farmlands. The government controlled the canals, the distribution of resources, and the workers who maintained the system. This relationship between water and people shaped human history for thousands of years. The first great kingdoms and some of the earliest systems of writing all grew from humanity's struggle to control rivers. But this does not mean every society without rivers was primitive or incapable of creating governments. There were powerful civilizations that developed in different environments, and many societies without major rivers built sophisticated political systems. However, the old history is impossible to ignore. Again and again, when humans found a great river surrounded by fertile land, they gained the ability to produce enormous amounts of food. That food supported huge populations. Huge populations required an organization. The organization created leaders. Leaders created institutions. And those institutions became governments. The story of civilization is often told as the story of great kings, famous battles, and incredible monuments. But long before the first king wore a crown or the first empire marched into war, the real ruler of the ancient world was sourced from a moving stream of water.